So we are continuing now with the Isopanishad. Excuse me. And today we're going to start with verse 12, which is very interesting. So a few words of introduction. Today we're going to look at verses 12 through 14. Verses 12 through 14 in the Isopanishad are closely parallel to verses 9 through 11. And they are intentionally, what's the word? Not ironic. They intentionally sort of shock us in the first of the three verses, and then the second verse of the set of three kind of says something we're used to, and third verse resolves everything. So let's begin. So in verse 12, we find the statement paradoxical. That is, they're paradoxical. So in verse 12, the Isopanishad says, Andhang tamat pravishanti jayasambhuti upasate. So let's talk about this. This, of course, is exactly parallel to verse number 9, Andhang tamat pravishanti jayavidyam upasate. So if you look at the first line of verse 9 and the first line of verse 12, just one word has changed. So in verse 9, it says, pravishanti, they enter into andhang tamak, sort of blindness and darkness. Because darkness, of course, makes one blind. So they enter into blind darkness, or blindness and darkness, who, yea, those who avidyam upasate, those who cultivate, those who dedicate themselves to avidya. Vidya means knowledge, avidya means unknowledge or ignorance, and often avidya is simply a word for the material world. The material world is often simply called the ignorance. And so the first verse of the set of three, 9 through 11, are a set of three verses. 9 through 11, 12 through 14 are a parallel set of three verses. So in verse 9 and in verse 12, the first line is normal. It's like, sure, that's what I expect to find in a Vedic Upanishad. No surprise that those who cultivate avidya, ignorance, enter into darkness and blindness. So that's something we would actually expect to read. But then it's the second line which surprises us, actually. The second line of the first verse of the set. The word andha, just to, it can be an adjective meaning blind, or it can simply mean darkness, blindness. So anyway, so andam tamat pravishanti jaya vidyam upasate, those who cultivate avidya, ignorance, enter into a blind darkness, or in 12, those who cultivate asambhutim enter into blind darkness. So what is asambhutim? I'll give you a very literal translation. actually, what I'll do, I think also is I think I will, let's get Prabhupada's version here, and I can tell you exactly how Prabhupada translates it. Prabhupada translates that as asambhutim, as demigods. Those who are engaged in the worship of demigods enter into the darkest region of ignorance. So literally, like in a very, very literal sense, what sambhuti actually means, first I'll give you the, sam means complete or together, like sankirtan. Sang just is a prefix, just meaning complete or together. So, and bhuti actually means existence. Existence. It's from the Sanskrit root bhu, which means to exist. And of course, we still have the be from bhu or bhavati, bhuti in the English word be, to be. So it can also mean a manifestation of might, great or superhuman power. So I want to get to the real root meaning here, which is that it's like complete existence. Bhu literally means to exist or to be. And so bhuti, existence or being. And in Sanskrit, you can make a noun out of verbal roots by adding the feminine suffix ti. So bhu and then bhuti, like for example, shruti, smriti, bhakti, et cetera, et cetera. So here we have the word bhuti, sambhuti, and so complete existence. And then asambhuti means incomplete existence, or that which is not actually the greatest power, which Prabhupada translates it as demigods. So I think it's good for you, the student of these literatures, to know Prabhupada's translation is not literal, but not wrong. We can follow the train of logic here. The logic is that sambhutim, full existence, complete existence, that therefore means great power, powerful existence, refers to Krishna ultimately. And then asambhuti, in this context, means incomplete existence, or existence which is not all powerful, and Prabhupada takes that to mean the demigods. So andhang tamak pravishanti jaya asambhutim upasate, then tato bhuya, even farther than that, even more than that, eva te tamo, they enter into darkness, jehu sambhutyam rataha, those who are engaged in the sambhuti. Sambhutyam, in verse 12, last line, just means within the sambhuti. So this is very interesting. So what we have here is a paradox. This is very intentionally a paradox, because if you start out by saying those who cultivate ignorance, avidya, enter into blind darkness, sure, that's what the Vedas, at least the philosophical portion, the spiritual portions of the Vedas, that's what they teach. No surprise. But the surprise is that if you enter into blind darkness by worshiping, let's say, avidya or asambhuti, meaning unknowledge or incomplete existence, literally asambhuti, then you would expect that if you worship sambhuti, the complete existence, or vidya, real knowledge, then you get all the rewards. But the second line of this verse surprises you, because you go into darkness, blind darkness, by worshiping ignorance or unknowledge or incomplete existence. But if you worship knowledge or complete existence, you're even worse off. So there's the puzzle. There's the mystery. What in the world does this mean? What in the world does this mean? And therefore I said that it's meant to like wake you up. This is what I call a shastric speed bump. It's you've got to slow down. You can't speed read through this, because if you're actually paying attention at this point, and let's say you're reading this for the first time, and you're paying attention, you're going to stop and say, what in the world does that mean? So let's see how that gets explained. Let's see how the paradox gets resolved. So if we look at verse 13, which is exactly parallel to verse 10, again, just those one or two words are changed. Otherwise, it says exactly the same thing. So verse 13 says, Anyad eva ahu. Ahu means they say. And this is a common thing. We find it in the Gita also. So whenever the Shastra says they say, and if you ask, well, who are they? It means people that know. They say it gets pretty hot here in the summer. And so what you mean by that is people who know. They say it gets hot here. So Anyadevahu, they say that indeed something else, sambhavat, from the, now sambhava here is an exact synonym of sambhuti, because from the verb bhu, to be, you can form a noun by adding ti, bhuti, as in bhakti, shruti, smriti, and so on. Or another way to make a noun is won't go into all the details, but sambhava. Sambhava and sambhuti are exactly the same thing. They're just forming the noun in different ways from the verb. So sambhavat, from sambhava, that's what sambhavat means, from sambhava, from complete existence, they say, indeed, there is another understood result, because we're talking about results here. Indeed, it is another result. And anyarahur, and they say it's again a different result, sambhavat, from incomplete existence. So from complete existence, they say, indeed, there's one result. It's like in English, we would say there's one result and another result. In Sanskrit, they say another. That's just the way they say one or the other, or one and another. So they say indeed one result from complete existence. They say another result from incomplete existence. And then it is said, iti shushuma, thus we have heard. And of course, keep in mind, whenever this verb is used, or noun, shru, this is just the perfect past tense, not perfect past, the preterite past tense of the verb shru, to hear. So shushruma, we heard. And that refers to shruti. In other words, we heard from Shastra, we heard from authorities, we heard from authorized sages. So thus we heard, here it said dhiranam, from dhiras, from true sages. Thus we heard from the wise, jedas tad vichachakshire, those who explained this to us. And in a sense, it means who made us see it. Chaksh can mean to see. So be the verb like chakshu. Chakshurun militang jena, right? What is it? Om Agyana Tmiran Dasya, that verse. And chakshur, my eyes, militam, my eyes were open. So chaksh has the idea of seeing. And so Vija Chakshire means to explain something, teach something so that somebody sees it. That's the idea. So thus we heard from the dhiras, the real sages who explained that to us. And of course, if we look back at verse 10, same thing. The last line of 10 and 13 are the same words. Iti shushruma dhiranam jenastad vicha chakshire. So at this point, if you read verse 12, and then you read verse 13, which says, you get one result from sambhava, complete existence, indeed another result from incomplete existence. Thus we've heard from the real sages who explain this to us. So what's the difference in result? Anyad and then anyad. What's the difference? If you go to the previous verse, you would think, well, the difference is that the people that cultivate incomplete existence go into blind darkness, terrible, and the people who cultivate, who are dedicated to complete existence, they go even further into hell or into blind darkness. That seems to be the difference. It seems to be like a no-win, no-win situation. Like damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you cultivate complete existence, you go into blind darkness. If you cultivate complete existence, you go even further into blind darkness. And again, this is exactly parallel. This verse 13 is exactly parallel to verse 10, which says that indeed one result from knowledge or by knowledge, and they say indeed one result by knowledge. They say another result by unknowledge, in Sanskrit, avidya, unknowledge, ignorance. Thus we have heard from the sages who explain this to us. So if you just look at verses 9 and 10, and then 12 and 13, you could become a real pessimist. Because, it's damned if you do, and even more damned if you don't. And so there seems to be no way out here. And of course, the third verse of each set, namely number 11, talking about vidya and avidya, and verse 13, talking about sambhuti and asambhuti, or sambhava and asambhava, which are synonyms, resolves it. It's apparent. In other words, it's meant to be a puzzle, but there is a solution to the puzzle. There actually is an answer, which explains everything. And so in verse 13, it said, 14, verse 14, sambhuting cha vinasam cha. So here, we're just using synonyms. Instead of, we started with sambhuti and then went to sambhava in verse 13. Now in verse 14, again, they're the same word, just formed differently. We're back to sambhuti. And we get a synonym. Instead of asambhuti or asambhava, incomplete existence, words that we found in 13, now we get a direct synonym, which is vinasham. Now vinasham means the destruction or the perishing, vinasha. I'll give you some synonyms from the Sanskrit dictionary for vinasha. It means utter loss, perdition, perlida, which in English is perdition, annihilation, destruction, decay, death, removal. So it's complete loss, pérdida total. So that's very interesting, because now we know, you see, if we're reading this as scholars and we're trying to read carefully, then what we now know is that asambhuti, incomplete existence, is very seriously incomplete, in the sense that it actually ends. Its existence, which just ends. That's how incomplete it is. It's incomplete in terms of duration of time. And so vinasha, which means utter loss, complete loss or annihilation, is what was meant by asambhuti and sambhava. So in verse 14, it is said, sambhuting cha vinasham cha. So both complete existence and complete destruction, which, if you think about it, really is the opposite of existence, because the opposite of existence is non-existence. The opposite of existing is to be destroyed. So it said, one who knows both together. One who knows both together. Yastad Veda Ubayam. Ubaya means both. Saha, together. So one who knows both together, both complete existence or real existence and non-existence or destruction or complete loss, then vinashena, by destruction, crossing over death, which is very interesting, by loss, by destruction, crossing over death, sambhutya, by complete existence, Amritam Ashnute, one enjoys the immortal. So let's look at Prabhupada's translation and see how he translates this. I think it's not going to be a literal translation, but it's certainly going to be a translation which gets to the essence of things. Very long purports. So Prabhupada translates this verse as, one should know perfectly the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna and his transcendental name, form, qualities, and pastimes. So how do you get that just from the word sambhuti? Because that's 1.5 lines to translate one word sambhuti. And from Prabhupada's point of view, that's what complete existence is. That's what complete existence is. It means to know complete existence means to know the personality of God as Sri Krishna and his transcendental name, form, qualities, and pastimes. So Prabhupada, as he said himself, is giving the purport, the meaning in the translation. So one should know that, as well as the temporary material creation. Again, that's just a translation for vinasha, which literally just means the destruction or the loss, as well as the temporary material creation with its temporary demigods, men and animals. So the temporary material creation with its temporary demigods, men and animals is a translation of the Sanskrit word vinasha. And so ultimately, that's what is vinasha. That's what destruction is. That is the set of things that will be destroyed. So when one knows these, he surpasses death and the ephemeral cosmic manifestation with it, and in the eternal kingdom of God, he enjoys his eternal life of bliss and knowledge. So in the eternal kingdom of God, he enjoys his eternal life of bliss and knowledge, translates Amritam Ashnute, he enjoys the immortal, or that which Amrita. So, but now, going back to verses 12 and 13, if by cultivating both you get this supreme reward, you transcend death and you enjoy the undying, then why did it say that one goes even, in verse 12, that one goes even deeper into ignorance by cultivating some bhuti? And so I think the only real logical way to solve this puzzle, because it is a puzzle, it's meant to be a puzzle, I think the only logical way to solve this is found in the simple Sanskrit word saha, or ubhayam saha, both together. That's the key to solving this, because again, in verses 9 through 11, you get the exact parallel. It's the same thing, just using 9 through 11 are exactly the same. It's just different words are used. You have vidya and avidya instead of sambhuti and asambhuti, or sambhava and vinasha. So you just substitute these words, otherwise it's exactly the same. So in both cases, the key is really ubhayang saha. So knowing both, not just one together. So let's see what the problem would be if you only knew one of these. Let's go back to verse 12, where it says, one who worships or cultivates asambhuti, or in verse 9, avidya, unknowledge. The problem here is that someone is just an ordinary materialist. They just devote themselves to the material world, to ignorance of the soul, ignorance of God. They just devote themselves to the material world. So of course they're going into a dark place, because they're just cultivating dead matter. And let's say, for example, the second line in verse 9, tato bhuya eva, or which says that you go even further into darkness by devoting yourself to knowledge in verse 9, or complete existence, sambhuti, the supreme existence, in verse 12. Because let's say you devote yourself to God. Let's say you devote yourself to God, but you're completely ignorant of the material world. You're going to end up in a very, very bizarre situation. For one thing, you know nothing about yourself. You don't understand your own psychology. You don't understand what your attachments are, so you may mistake your attachments for some kind of spiritual emotion. I mean, to give one example, the famous example of Rishyasringa. He was a sage, and as a young boy, he was raised by his father. And his father, who was a Vedic sage, lived in the forest, very austere, was so determined that my child won't fall down into grihastha life and all that, that he was so determined to keep his child as a sort of pure celibate sage that he never told his son that there are two genders. His son had no idea there were two genders. We do know there are two genders, most of us. So, so what happened is in a nearby kingdom, there was a drought, and the sages, the royal priests, told the king that the only way to stop this drought and save the kingdom and save the people is to perform this very difficult Vedic sacrifice. We are not qualified to perform it. The only person that actually has the power to pull this off is a young sage named Rishyasringa. Of course, but the king was informed that it's going to be really difficult to get him to come and do this because his father will not let him leave the ashram. So they came up with a plan. They found very beautiful young ladies in the kingdom. As in every kingdom, in every gene pool, some young ladies are very pretty. And so they found these very pretty young girls and they sent them on a mission. So the girls, they were also intelligent, they were clever. And so they waited until the father had gone off to collect firewood or fruits. He was, he wasn't going to come back for hours. And they just kind of waltzed into the ashram. And this is in the Mahabharata. And so Rishyasringa greeted them and said, because, didn't see many people out there in the wilderness, so he's happy to see them. He said, "Hello, gentlemen, welcome." And he thought their anatomy was a little strange. Their chests were a little different than, he'd seen. And they're sort of the shape of their body. So he thought, well, people are different. So he thought they were just these young men who were, attractive young men, but just their bodies were a little shaped a little differently than his. So when he greeted them, he was very nice and offered them hospitality. And so they made a big show of being grateful. "Oh, that's so nice of you. That is so kind of you. Let us embrace you." So they embraced him, and they really embraced him. And so Rishyasringa said, "This is so amazing that I've never felt so much pleasure embracing a man before." And so he was really happy. Have all these beautiful young girls embracing him. He was very happy. He thought they were young men, but he thought, I feel so happy embracing you. Anyway, to make a long story short, they got their man. These beautiful young girls did bring Rishyasringa back to the city with them, the royal city. And of course, his father found out too late. And he came to the city, did the sacrifice, and saved the kingdom. So there's a point of naivete, which is kind of going too far. In the case of Rishyasringa, he couldn't defend himself. I mean, luckily, those girls wanted him for a good purpose, but what if they wanted him for some other purpose? And so someone that has no knowledge of the material world can't really defend themselves. So so one who cultivates knowledge of the eternal but has no idea. Another thing is, because I mean, we all have some lingering remnants of material desires. And if you know nothing about this world, then you cannot distinguish what your material or spiritual desires are. It's like you know, sometimes very young devotees, I remember in the early days, I don't know if it still goes on, you get some young brahmachari who you know, is attracted to some young brahmacharini in the temple room. And so when he goes to lead kirtan and that girl is present, he jumps higher than ever, thinking actually with very little true understanding that women are kind of beautiful young women are attracted to men that jump very high, or who, you know, play the drum or, you know, lead kirtan or something. And of course the woman is just thinking, haha, that fool is attracted, otherwise he wouldn't be making a monkey out of himself. But he's attracted, so that's good. So let's work on that. So anyway, so all these things are going on. Or you find the same thing. I remember young women devotees, they can suddenly, you know, if there's some good-looking unmarried Sankirtan leader, suddenly they realize that all they've ever wanted in millions of lifetimes is to go out and sell books. And so you have these situations that people don't really know themselves, don't really understand their own psychology. They're just not experienced. They're not bad people, they're just inexperienced. Then you can't really save yourself. You can't really figure out what's going on inside of you emotionally. So, and so ultimately someone who has no knowledge of the material world can be even more degraded, can become more degraded than someone, let's say, who is not so spiritual, but really is kind of streetwise. I mean, they know what the material world is, and therefore, to some extent, they can avoid really serious problems. Let's say, for example, someone that has no idea that there is such a thing as an addictive drug. They actually don't know that there are addictive drugs. And so someone could say, oh, here's something nice you can take, and, you know, smoke this, drink that. So I think it's easy to see that if you only knew you only had spiritual ideas in your head and you're just really ignorant and naive about the material world, you could become very seriously degraded. And so therefore, I think the key to solving this puzzle, the puzzle of verses 10 through 12 and verses 9 through 11, verses 9 through 11 and 12 through 4, the secret to solving this puzzle actually comes in the last verse, the words tad vedo vayang saha, one who knows both together. And this is very interesting because what it shows is that for a complete spiritual life, you really need to understand this world. You really do need to understand this world. And you know, at a certain stage in life, my own life, to be honest, reveal my own terrible state, that at a certain point in my own life, I became very interested in, hopefully not too interested in, trying to understand the world, history and psychology. And, you know, and you can understand these things through literature, in many ways. And so I think in my own life, I've felt that knowledge, actually studying, has fortified my spiritual life, has made me more steady and wiser and ultimately stronger in my spiritual life. Not neglecting the spiritual side, but again, tad bedo bhayang saha, one who knows both of these together. So I think that is the key to solving the mystery or the paradox of these two sets of three verses. So no questions? Then very good. So thank you all very much for listening. Question did come in. Oh, they're coming in on WhatsApp. I'm a multimedia guru. So if you're looking for a multimedia guru, let's see. What if someone who is not as fond of studying, but still is very aware of the world's true nature? Yeah, that's fine. And, if you can figure it out, some scholars are the most impractical people on earth. So if one somehow becomes wise about what this world really is, it doesn't have to be academic. Can they make spiritual advancement without knowing as much about specifics of Shastra and our philosophy? Again, you have to have both together. If you're aware of the world's true nature, you can't really be aware of only one. Because if you know the material world fairly well, you sort of, you've lived life and you have you have life experience. But if you don't know that you're an eternal soul, if you don't know who Krishna is, then you can't ultimately understand this world, because what is this world ultimately? What is it really? If you understand this world and don't understand the spiritual, you may just want to try to enjoy this world in the most clever way possible. So to understand what the world really is and to become ultimately detached from it, we have to know what the spiritual is. That doesn't have to be academic, but it has to be knowledge. Okay, so I guess we'll stop here. Thank you all very much.